Hello, everyone. My name is Claire Bradley, and you're very welcome to the April virtual meeting for our DNA courses. I am standing in for our usual course tutor, Shannon, and today is DNA Day. And you might say, what on earth is that? And I think quite a lot of people would say that because it's not something that existed a few years ago, but it's basically a marketing tool for the companies to mark the advent of DNA, to offer discounts, and to generally get people talking about DNA and how they can use it. The reason that it is today, the 25th of April, is today is the anniversary, 71 years ago, of a paper being published in Nature, which is an important scientific journal, by Watson and Crick, and it's their seminal paper on understanding DNA. And of course, they failed to credit Miss Franklin, whose input was crucial to the project, but they ignored her. They went on to win the Nobel Prize. And the rest, as they say, is history. And for about 20 years now, we have been using DNA tests for genealogical reasons, and they're getting more and more detailed in what we can use with them. And it's an exciting time because we still don't know how far they're going to go. I could be sitting here next year, next month, saying they've done this amazing thing that we couldn't do last month. And I give a lot of talks for people, basic talks on how to use DNA for genealogy. And what I find very often is that I've written the talk, and 2 months later, I go to give it to another organization and I have to revise it because something has changed in that very short time frame, which is astonishing. So let me share my slides with you. And we're a small group today, so please feel free to jump in with any questions or comments if you have them as we go along. So I just called this, what sort of DNA test should I choose? And of course, there are different types of questions you might have about your ancestry, which you could use DNA to help interrogate. So we'll take it slowly through each one, and we'll talk about what kind of problem you would use with them. So the first type of test that became available was Y-DNA. And Y-DNA is a test that only men can take because only men have a Y chromosome. And that doesn't mean, of course, that women can't study the Y-DNA. They just need to get someone in their family who is a man who is of the right line to take the test for them. And I say line, and that's a very crucial point with Y-DNA, is that we've 23 chromosomes and pairs, and we get one from each of our parents. But when we look at DNA and we look at what Y-DNA can do for it, it only gives us one ancestral line, which is our father's 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 line, our patrilineal line. Now, in Western European culture, that generally is the line that is your surname as well. Most people inherit their paternal grandfather's surname. Or some version of it. So when we're tracking that, it is also useful for looking at our surnames. So it is a narrower base than some of the other DNA tests that we can explore because it only is looking at this one line. It also is something that changes very slowly over time. So one good thing about Y-DNA is that if you've got, say, your brother or your dad to test, you don't need to test other men in your family. They're all going to have the same Y-DNA. Now, there might be one or two small mutations, but very likely they're going to have identical Y-DNA. And that will have gone back quite far in time. So let me go on to my next slide. So what are we using Y-DNA for? The main reason you would look at Y-DNA is you're tracking your paternal surname. So, for example, if you were helping someone who was adopted and they didn't know who their father was, and you had a couple of candidates and those people were dead, so they couldn't be tested themselves, you might get someone else in the family to do a Y-DNA test to confirm that they had the same Y-DNA. Now, what you get with that result is a list of matches. And the list of matches give you a genetic distance. So it goes from 0 up to any number you care to name. And of course, the closer to 0, the more recently related you're going to be. But the trouble with Y-DNA is because it changes so slowly over time, is that even that genetic distance of 0 might be a few hundred years ago. and you might not be able to confirm that hypothesis with records. So in Ireland, for example, a lot of men have the same Y-DNA haplogroup, which is the word we use to describe the different branches of Y-DNA that we have uncovered. And there are many, many haplogroups, but many of the men who are tested in Ireland have the same one. So that doesn't actually help us unless we narrow it down. Now, how do you narrow it down? Well, you look at the genetic distance, you look at the family trees, of course, and none of what we're saying today is useful without family trees. It's much more difficult to work on Y-DNA or any DNA if you don't have a solid basis for your traditional paper-built family tree with your sources, your birth, death, and marriage records, your census records, and so on. So the better your traditional tree is, the more useful it's going to be for DNA. And what you find with matches for DNA, and this is true of all the tests, is that your tree tends to get wider rather than further back. Now, I'm not saying you can't extend your tree backwards with DNA, but where you're going to find your matches often are in the siblings of your direct ancestors and their descendants. So you're going to go wider. So other uses that we can do with DNA, with Y-DNA, is you can connect to deeper ancestry. You can possibly connect into historical periods. So in Ireland, for example, we had a sort of a clan structure, not quite the same as what they had in Scotland, and some historians prefer to use the term sept. And anybody could inherit the title of clan chief as long as they had a common great-grandfather. So when British control came into significant play in Ireland, that changed, and they changed the inheritance pattern to what they had in Britain, which is primogeniture, the eldest son inheriting. But many people then can't connect back to this earlier period, but it's something that we can do a bit with Y-DNA. So I know that there's some very interesting projects going on at the moment to try and get the DNA of people who are currently the chiefs of certain names in Ireland so that they can try and position them on the haplotree. On Family Tree DNA, which is the only website at the moment where you can do a Y-DNA test, they have surname projects. And they not just surname projects, but for Y-DNA particularly, they have surname projects that you can join and collaborate with other people who have the surname that you're interested in. Now, it's not necessary that you have that surname yourself. You might be working on a particular branch of your family tree that is not your own name now, but it's further back in the tree. And it can help you link in. And what they're trying to do is map the branches of a surname in different places and see, can I connect those families through DNA? It's fascinating work. So what might you do with, if you haven't taken a Y-DNA test at all, what might you do? The first step would be to test an immediate family member who was a man. So it might be yourself, or it might be your dad or your brother. If there's not someone in that category for you, your next step would be to try and find a paternal first cousin who was descended from an uncle, so that they would have the same surname as you, and therefore they would be carrying the Y chromosome, the same Y chromosome. So it's always boys here. So if you've got a male first cousin on your father's side, well, they're going to have the same Y chromosome as your dad and their dad, and so on. And ideally, if you can afford to, and not everyone can, of course, you want to do the big Y test. So the big Y is the largest, the most refined Y-DNA test that they offer. And it's normally about $400. It's a pricey thing to buy. And there is a discount on it this week to celebrate DNA Day. And that tests not just the markers that Y looks at, but it also tests the SNPs. So it gives you a much better refinement on where you fit into the haplotree. I'm actually waiting for one of those to come back from my brother at the moment, so I'm very excited to play with it. Who knows when it will appear though, but they seem to be running quite slowly on these at the moment. So as well as testing, and I should say that Family Tree DNA store these samples for 25 years. So if you can't afford to spend a lot of money on this at the moment, but you feel like, oh, someone in the family might die who's important in this category, you could just do the Y37, which is nowadays the entry-level test. You could do the smaller test, and then you could upgrade it later on. So that's actually what I did with my uncle. I first tested him about a decade ago, and I did a Y12 test, which doesn't exist now. And it's practically useless. It more or less told him he was a white man from Europe, which he already knew. But I have now upgraded that over the years. So that's your dad's side, and that's your patrilineal line. But I mean, of course, you have other Y opportunities in the family. So, for example, first thought is a maternal uncle, if you have one, which would give you your mother's surname line, or grandfather, of course, or a male first cousin on your mother's side who was born to an uncle of yours, not an aunt, obviously, because that would have different Y DNA. So you might do that. I actually tested the Y DNA of a third cousin once removed of mine, because I was particularly interested in tracking that surname and working on it. And I just could afford the Y37 at that point. In fact, he said he'd go halves on it with me, but it still cost about $150 at the time that we did it. So we haven't actually upgraded that beyond the Y37 yet, but it's on my list. I don't know if you're like me. I have a list of when I have money, when I've won the lottery, which I never play, the people who I'm going to do DNA tests on if they're willing. And of course, goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, you should always have the consent of the person that you're asking to do this, and you should make them understand what you're asking them to do. You know, particularly if they're elderly people, you want to make sure that they know what you're talking about. All right, let's go on to mitochondrial DNA. So mitochondrial DNA is a test that can be taken by anybody, any men or women can take it. And you get mitochondrial DNA from your mother. Men get it and they don't pass it on. Women get it and they do pass it on to any children that they have. So it's like the opposite of the Y DNA. It's your mother's 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 line. For me, that goes back to a woman who only died in 1908. And I know her name and I know her husband's name, but there's no marriage record for them. It's in a point when there are no civil records in Ireland, and the parish that they likely got married in doesn't have records from that period. So I can't go any further with her line with records. And this is why I took the mitochondrial test. So I thought perhaps I will connect with somebody someday who matches me on that line, and they will know more than I do, which is, of course, the dream, that you find somebody and they go, oh, I've done it all already. And then, of course, you're going to go off and verify it. But you know, they might have something that you don't have. So I have taken that test. I have to say it hasn't been of a whole lot of use to me yet. It also provides a haplogroup, but they're not the same haplogroups as you get with Y, so you'd be different ones. And you also get a list of matches which have a genetic distance. I actually have someone who is a genetic distance of 0 to me in that category. And that person hasn't got an Irish name at all. They have no family tree put up on FTDNA, and they have never replied to my email. So I can't really get anywhere with that at the moment, which is annoying. But, you know, I live in hope that they will reply to me. So family tree DNA is also the only place that you can take a mitochondrial test at the moment. And it's got some issues. And the issues are really because very few people have taken this test. And because few people have taken it, it has remained expensive. And when I took it, it was about €300 to take this test, which was a few years ago now. But it did give me some very interesting details about deep ancestry. And here's a reason, a practical reason why you might use mitochondrial DNA in a test. So say you're working with someone who has no idea who their parents are. You've used autosomal DNA, which we're going to come on to in a minute, and you have identified 2 families where you believe the parents of this person, one of them is in each family, but you don't know yet whether the mother is in family A or family B. You could do a mitochondrial test and compare it to someone else in that family. And if the mitochondrial DNA matched, well, then you would know that the mother was in family B, and then you could focus on the men in the other family. That's one example. Mitochondrial DNA also changes very slowly over time, so you don't need to test multiple people to get extra benefit. So I've tested myself in this case, but I know that I have the same mitochondrial DNA as my mother, spoiler. And I also have my great aunt tested her autosomal DNA. She's dead now, and I spent a lot of time making sure that she understood what I was asking her to do when she did it. And but she would have the same mitochondrial DNA because she is my grandmother's sister, my mother's mother's sister. So I know where we're going with that line. Just as an interesting point, Richard III, who the King of England, whose skeleton was identified a few years ago now, it was 10 years ago in Leicester City. They actually used mitochondrial DNA to confirm that identification. They had Y DNA and they compared what he had with descendants who should match his Y DNA, and they didn't match. And so what happened there probably is they think that there were not one but two instances of a misattributed parentage going quite far back in time. And there was many generations between Richard and the modern day. I think it was something like 16 generations. And they were able to say there's twice where the Y DNA has changed. So somebody's dad wasn't their dad. But they were able to also get mitochondrial DNA by tracking the line from one of Richard's sisters down to the present day. And that was the clincher in proving it. And that just shows you how long it takes for mitochondrial DNA to change. In 16 generations, they were still able to match it up. So you could use it, but what I find is that most people are not using it. And it's something that I hope is going to improve over time. And so then we come on to the autosomal DNA, which is the big one, I suppose, the one that most people have taken, the one that costs less than $100 to buy. I remember a decade ago, or more than a decade ago, saying to someone that I was just going to wait for these tests to become much cheaper and for them to be able to do all kinds of things we couldn't imagine. And she quoted my own words back to me a few years later. And she said, it didn't even take 5 years to get to that point there. So most of the time you can buy an autosomal DNA test for about, I'd say $80 to $100. And there are, again, discounts this week if you haven't done one yet. The good news is anybody can take this test. And it provides matches to approximately out to 6th cousins, but it can be difficult to confirm who people are in the 4th to 6th cousin range, whereas the closer ones, you have a much better chance of working out who they are. You can do a lot with autosomal DNA. You can uncover recent skeletons in the closet, which I have spelt wrong in my slideshow, I'm noticing. And you can solve recent brick walls, or not even that recent. My own personal best is that I solved a brick wall of my great-great-grandfather, who I only had a small amount of detail about, and basically he didn't exist before his marriage. And I thought I had the reasons for that and that I would never get anywhere with it. And then eventually, without even really trying, I discovered that the reason I couldn't find him was that he wasn't from Ireland. He was, in fact, from England. And he, instead of, like most people, emigrating from Ireland to England, he had emigrated from England to Ireland. And I had considered that his surname, which was Walters, wasn't an Irish name, but I didn't know anything about where to look in England. And I said that would be a needle in a haystack. And without any information, I really wouldn't have much to go on. But DNA popped up and said, hello. And eventually I reached out to someone, didn't know how we were related, but could see it was going to be on my mother's father's side. Gave her a list of names, said, what do you think? And she said, oh, yes, I recognize this name. And my great-grandmother was a Walters. And actually, she had a brother called George who disappeared. We have him, and then he's gone. And then it turned out that her George was my George. And we were able to also confirm it with records then, but everybody who was descended from his sister matched everybody who was descended from George in my family at the appropriate level for what we would be expecting. So that was very nice confirmation of what had happened. And now I'm able to say I have English ancestry, and I'm able to take that back quite a bit further than what I thought was going to be a brick wall forever. I also solved a mystery of what happened to somebody in my family. There was an uncle of my grandmother's who had disappeared, and we never knew what happened to him. And through DNA, we solved that mystery as well. Sadly, my grandmother was no longer alive, because when I first started working on genealogy, she said, Claire, the only thing I want you to find out is what happened to my Uncle Joe. I do know what happened to her Uncle Joe now, but unfortunately, it was too late to tell her. So it's important to point out that with autosomal DNA, if there is a skeleton in the closet, you're going to find it. So it's always important to say this to people, that if they have any concerns about something, that they need to think about whether they want to do it or not. Now, of course, for some people, their concern is that they don't know something and they want to find it out. So for adoptees, for people who were perhaps a foundling or something like that, that this is definitely going to help them. And I'm very proud to say that I've helped many people uncover who their birth parents were through DNA, when often we have no information at all at the beginning. So it is a powerful, powerful tool. And it's still advancing in technology terms. So this is one where it's absolutely worth getting other people in your family to take the test as well. So my recommended methodology for it is to test the oldest people in your family first. So I mentioned that I was able to test a great aunt of mine, and none of my grandparents were alive by the time DNA was around. I've tested my mother. I have tested all of my parents' siblings. And I also have tested some second cousins and cousins of my parents. So for my father, he was dead before we could do a DNA test. So I have got a first cousin of his on each side of his family tree to do a test for me, as well as myself and my brother. And so, and then I also have his siblings tested as well. So I have the best reconstruction I can have of my father's DNA out of that group. And so the reason you want to test these further out people in your family tree is that they will help you cluster your matches. So if I go onto Ancestry and I have a new match and I look at them and I see who are the shared matches and I see, oh, they match my mother's cousin, Kate. Well, I know who Kate is, and I know what branch of my family tree Kate's on. So if I see that Kate is in that category, well, then automatically I can presume that all of the shared matches for that group also fit into that branch of my family tree. Now, they might be further back than Kate, or they might be more recent, they might be younger than her. I don't know that yet, but what I can say is I'm definitely looking at this quarter of my family tree and I can eliminate all the rest, which is really useful. A few years ago, we couldn't do that sort of thing. And when you contacted a new DNA match, it was a bit like shouting into the wind. You just went, hello, and you said all your surnames and you hoped for the best. But now we have more powerful tools as time goes by. So my recommended methodology for buying an autosomal test, if you had not done one before, is to buy the test on Ancestry, where you cannot do a transfer into it. You have to buy a test to be in the Ancestry database. It has 25 million people in it, and it is still growing. And then you can transfer those results. You could download a file and then you upload it. You can upload it for free to Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, Living DNA, and GEDmatch. Now, GEDmatch has some ethical considerations that you want to think about. That's a talk for another day, I think. But some of those companies will charge you a small unlocking fee to access all of their tools, and you definitely want to pay that. But watch out on their social media, because those companies do often do a weekend where if you upload for free, you get access to everything permanently. So I transferred my DNA onto the various sites where I hadn't already taken the DNA test. And then as a last resort, you might want to take a test with 23andMe. Now, 23andMe, you also have to pay for. You can't transfer into it. And why am I saying last when it's actually the second largest database? I'm saying last because of the massive problems they've had because of the credential stuffing incident last October. It's a question mark at the moment of whether they're going to survive. They're publicly traded, but it looks like they're going to take the company private again. And they also have dramatically reduced some of their tools. Now, some of them are back again. Well, so they, you could say that they perhaps don't care enough about their customers' security issues. Or hopefully they will now in future. But you do also find that people who've taken the 23andMe test have taken it for what I like to call spurious medical reasons. They're interested in all the traits that you get with the 23andMe test. My particular favorite, I took a test there just to see, was that it told me that I liked either vanilla or chocolate ice cream. And they can apparently tell that from my DNA. I can tell you that I like both chocolate and vanilla ice cream. So they're wrong about that as well. So because people are interested in the medical side of things that they're getting from that, and I should say that if you have medical concerns, you should go to your doctor and get tests and not rely on a direct consumer autosomal DNA test. it does mean that people are less interested in their genealogy sometimes who are on that site. But you definitely do get a different pool of people on that site that you don't get on the other. So if you test on Ancestry and you transfer, you will definitely see some of the same people in your matches on the different companies' websites. But you might not see those in 23andMe. But on the other hand, they might never reply to your message, and you might get no information at all about their family tree from them. And so they'll just sit there being useless for you. So that's why I say do it last, or if you win the lottery, well, hey, go for it. So lastly, I just wanted to point out that because it is DNA Day today, there are many discounts from different companies out there. All the major testing sites are offering some sort of discount, and it won't just end today, it'll go on for a couple of days. There's also a special series of Roots Tech legacy webinars and family tree DNA talks for today, which are focusing on DNA. And there are also discount codes available for subscribing to DNA Painter and Banyan DNA, which are two third-party tools that you might like to use for enhancing what you can learn on the testing site. So if you haven't used those, I highly recommend that you do. I'm just going to stop my screen share just to show you a picture that I have on my wall. This is a chart of the shared centimorgan project that you can get on DNA Painter, and it works out an average amount of DNA that you would share with a particular relationship and a range, and the range can be huge. And if you haven't ever looked at that before, it's really worth your time to take a look at it. And you can also on that site for free, you can go on, you can put in a number. So say you want to say, oh, I want to know what 791 centimorgans might be. And it gives you a percentage odds of what relationships are the most likely for that category of DNA, which is really useful when you've got someone and you don't know who they are and you're trying to figure it out, because you don't want to just rely on what the testing site has said. So that is my little summary of the different types of DNA tests that are out there and what you might use them for. Does anyone have any particular questions? Is anyone having any particular questions with coursework as well? Of course, that's fine to ask. Go ahead and let me know now. You got nothing. Is anyone taking one of the DNA courses at the moment? What are you taking? No?
I thought you were going to ask if we've taken DNA tests. Sorry.
Oh, you can. Tell me what DNA tests you've taken by all means.
Oh, okay. Well, I've taken the Y-DNA through Family Tree DNA.
Yes.
My wife and I did the health thing through 23andMe, which was we don't have health concerns. It was just interesting.
Yeah.
Was
What ice
your
cream did you like?
attached, and yeah, and is your ring finger longer than your index finger?
All
Stuff like that. It was just kind of
My
neat.
understanding is that the best ones of those are that it is quite good at determining what your eye color is and your natural hair color. And for me, it was quite accurate with those things. And the rest of them, it was just sort of hit and miss, whether it was right or not.
Yeah, it was just fun.
It
And
is.
then
It's just a little bit of fun, but you don't want to be relying on it. And I think some
no.
people are, and that's that. It's absolutely fun to look at. There's one on the ancestry traits. Or like, do you like dogs or not? And I thought, well, that's a binary, isn't it? It's going to be right for at least half of everyone. And Julie, have you taken any DNA tests?
No, I have not.
Okay. Are you thinking about it?
I'm not sure yet.
Okay. Well, I mean, you're right to think about it, because there are concerns that people have about, privacy and security and so on. But I personally think that it's much more dangerous to use Facebook than do a DNA test. I repeat my story that I probably have told you before, that I found a guy on 23andMe and we didn't know how we were related. And he did talk to me, but he didn't know much about his family tree. But he had a very unusual surname himself. So I got together with one of my cousins and we researched his surname, not him, his surname. And we figured out who he was. And it turned out that his grandmother and my grandmother were first cousins. And I actually had his grandmother in my family tree already, but I didn't know the names of her children or grandchildren. So I added him and his parents to the tree, 3 people. And then I went onto Facebook and I found him on Facebook. And then I added 33 more members of his family to my family tree, because I could read and I use Facebook. People put up a lot more information on Facebook than they should. Happy birthday to my mother, 75 today, born in Philadelphia. And you're like, okay, great, Philadelphia birth indexes, and you're off.
And they don't realize how much they're putting out there.
No, they don't. And of course you want to wish your mother a happy birthday, but you could probably ring her or even see her. You don't have to do it publicly on Facebook and give away personal data that people use for banking and so on. So that always amuses me that people say, oh, there's a lot of concerns about DNA, but it actually requires quite specialized knowledge to exploit. And there could be positive reasons why we might use DNA evidence in the future. I mean, it's not just the crime solving aspects of it, but you could perhaps tailor the information that we get from smartwatches in tandem with DNA tests and produce personalized healthcare plans for people in the future. You know, which I would see as a positive thing, as opposed to go, well, this works for most people, we'll try it on you. Well, yeah, obviously we're not there yet. I mean, so it doesn't have to be negative what might happen with DNA testing, but I can guarantee you that it definitely will grow your family tree. My family tree was about 1,000 people before I started using DNA tests, and it's over 4,000 people now. And you might also say, but Claire, you're also a better genealogist, and that's true too. But I'm sure that quite a lot of that extra increase has come from the DNA testing. So that is all I've got to say for us today. I'm going to stop the recording there. Thank you very much for listening.